Archaeologists in northern Mongolia have uncovered a 25-foot humanoid skeleton.
Try and put myself here for reference.
It actually looks pretty cool.
We found giant skeletons.
Country village residents.
It had a human-shaped head, ribs, and even arms, but the lower part...
Something unexpected is happening along the Euphrates River. As the water slowly retreats, the land beneath is revealing secrets hidden for centuries. An ancient sword buried in stone, giant footprints too large to belong to any human, and discoveries some believe may connect to the giants mentioned in ancient texts. For many believers, the Euphrates is more than a river. Prophecy says major events will unfold there. Now that these mysteries are appearing, one question is spreading around the world. Are these simply ancient relics, or signs pointing toward the prophecy of Christ's return? If this story interests you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we uncover what may be revealed next. It began with a discovery that no one expected. Along a dry stretch of land not far from the ancient course of the Euphrates River, a group of archaeologists noticed something unusual protruding from a massive slab of rock. At first glance, it looked like a piece of metal, darkened by centuries of dust and soil. But as the team carefully cleared away the surrounding sediment, the shape slowly became clear. It was a sword, not lying beside the stone, not buried under it. The sword was embedded directly into the rock, driven deep into the center of a solid stone block, as if it had been forced there with unimaginable strength. The blade stood upright, pointing toward the sky. No handle marks around the stone, no cracks suggesting the rock had split. It looked as if the sword had been placed there intentionally, long ago. And yet no one could explain how. The stone itself appeared ancient, weathered by centuries of wind and heat. Geological analysis suggested it had remained undisturbed for a very long time. But the sword piercing its center showed almost no corrosion. The metal was dark, but not rusted. Its edges, though worn, were still sharply defined. The hilt carried faint patterns that looked almost ceremonial, symbols that no one on the excavation team immediately recognized. This raised a troubling question. If the sword had truly been there for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, why had it not decayed like every other weapon from antiquity? Photographs of the discovery quickly began circulating online. Within hours, people across the world started drawing comparisons to one of the most famous legends ever told, the story of the sword in the stone. In medieval lore, a blade embedded in rock could only be removed by the one chosen by destiny. The weapon acted almost like a test of authority, waiting silently until the right moment arrived. But historians quickly pointed out that this discovery was far older than the legends associated with kings and knights. That realization opened the door to another theory. Some observers began linking the object to ancient religious texts, particularly descriptions found in the Bible. In several passages, swords are used not only as weapons, but as symbols of divine power and protection. One of the most striking examples appears in the book of Genesis, where a heavenly guardian stands watch over sacred ground. As the scripture describes it, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. Genesis 3:24. For many believers, the symbolism of a sword is not merely about war. It represents authority, judgment, and protection. And that is where the mystery surrounding this discovery grows even deeper. Some researchers examining the site began to notice something unusual about the way the sword was positioned. The blade was driven into the stone at an angle that seemed deliberate, almost like a marker or seal. Not a weapon discarded after battle, but something placed there with purpose, almost like a lock or a seal. In ancient traditions across many cultures, objects made of metal, especially blades, were sometimes used in rituals to mark boundaries or symbolically seal something beneath the ground. The idea may sound strange, but archaeologists have documented similar practices in several ancient civilizations. Weapons buried in foundations or embedded in stone were sometimes believed to protect sacred spaces or restrain dangerous forces. If that interpretation is correct, the sword near the Euphrates may not have been left there randomly. It may have been placed there intentionally, to mark something, or perhaps to keep something contained. Local residents who heard about the discovery quickly added another layer to the story. Some recalled old regional legends describing ancient places where objects were buried or sealed to prevent powerful forces from returning to the world. Of course, scientists remain cautious. There may be perfectly reasonable explanations for the sword's preservation and placement. Metallurgy tests, carbon dating, and geological surveys are still ongoing, but one detail continues to puzzle researchers. Despite the centuries that have passed, the sword has not loosened from the stone. It remains fixed exactly where it was found, unmoved by time, standing silently in the rock, as if waiting. But as strange as this discovery may be, the sword embedded in stone was only the first mystery uncovered in this region. Because not far from where the blade was found, investigators would soon encounter another sign, one that raised even more unsettling questions. Marks in the earth, massive impressions pressed deep into hardened ground. Footprints far too large to belong to any ordinary human. Not long after the discovery of the ancient sword embedded in stone, another strange sign appeared near the Euphrates. This time, it was not metal or stone that drew attention. It was the ground itself. Following several days of unusually heavy rain, the dry soil along an old section of land near the river began to soften. As water washed away layers of dust and sediment, the surface of the earth slowly revealed shapes that had been hidden beneath it. At first, the marks looked like shallow depressions in the soil, but as the mud dried and the shapes became clearer, researchers realized something unsettling. They looked like footprints, two massive impressions pressed deep into the ground, standing several meters apart. Each print was far larger than a human foot. The shape was unmistakable. The outline resembled a bare foot, with the curve of the heel and the separation of the toes clearly visible. The proportions appeared strangely natural, almost as if they had been left by a living being walking across the land. But the size was impossible to ignore. Each footprint measured far beyond the length of any human step. The distance between them suggested a stride far greater than that of an ordinary person, almost like a single step taken by something enormous. Archaeologists and geologists quickly began studying the area. Some researchers proposed that the formations might simply be the result of natural erosion. Over time, rainwater and shifting soil can create unusual shapes in the ground that sometimes resemble familiar forms. But others were not so quick to dismiss the discovery. The details of the impressions appeared surprisingly symmetrical. The toe marks were distinct, the arches well-defined. The depth of the prints suggested that whatever made them had applied significant weight when pressing into the earth. This was not just a shallow pattern on the surface. The ground beneath the prints had been compressed. Images of the footprints quickly spread across the internet, and speculation followed almost immediately. Some viewers compared them to ancient stories of giants walking the earth. Others believed the prints were simply an unusual geological formation. But among religious communities, another interpretation began to circulate, one tied directly to an ancient prophecy connected to the Euphrates River. According to the Book of Revelation, the Euphrates is associated with a mysterious and powerful event involving four restrained spiritual beings. The passage reads, "Release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." Revelation 9:14. For centuries, this verse has puzzled theologians and scholars. The idea that four angels were bound at the Euphrates has inspired countless interpretations about what the text might truly mean. Some see the passage as symbolic. Others believe it refers to spiritual forces restrained until a specific moment in history. But as images of the enormous footprints circulated online, a few observers began asking an unsettling question. What if the marks in the earth were not simply random formations? What if they were connected to something described long ago? Could the massive prints near the river be traces left by beings far larger than humans? Beings that ancient texts described as angels? Of course, scientists remain cautious about such interpretations. There is currently no direct evidence linking the footprints to anything supernatural. Yet the discovery continues to stir curiosity, because the footprints were not located randomly across the landscape. They appeared near the same region where the ancient sword had been found, and that coincidence has only deepened the mystery. Some researchers have suggested that the marks could represent something entirely different, perhaps ancient carvings, ritual impressions, or geological patterns created over centuries. But others cannot ignore the eerie alignment between ancient prophecy and modern discoveries. A sword embedded in stone, giant footprints appearing after heavy rain, and a river long associated with mysterious forces described in the final book of the Bible. Whether coincidence or something more, the discoveries near the Euphrates continue to raise questions that few people expected to ask. Because if the footprints truly belong to something far larger than a human, then they may point toward a much deeper mystery, one that leads directly to another controversial topic whispered about in ancient texts and legends around the world: the existence of giants. Before we continue, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. What investigators discovered next may completely change how you see this river. The strange discoveries near the Euphrates did not end with the ancient sword or the massive footprints pressed into the earth. Soon after those findings began attracting attention, another report surfaced, one that shocked both researchers and the public. During a nearby excavation, a group of investigators working beneath layers of ancient soil uncovered something unexpected: bones, but not ordinary bones. At first, the fragments looked like large pieces of stone mixed with sediment. Yet as the excavation continued and the pieces were carefully brushed clean, the team began to realize what they were looking at. They appeared to be human bones, only far larger than any normal human skeleton. Several long bones were uncovered first, what seemed to be parts of legs and arms. When measured, they were dramatically longer than the bones of an average adult. Even more surprising was the thickness of the bone structure. The shafts were wide and dense, suggesting they once supported enormous weight. Then came the discovery that stunned the excavation team the most: a skull. It was partially buried in hardened soil and tilted slightly to one side. When the surrounding earth was removed, the size of the skull became clear. It was massive. The structure was far larger than the skull of a typical human. The brow ridge appeared thicker, and the bone density suggested a powerful frame once supported it. Researchers carefully documented the find, taking measurements and photographs as they worked. If the bones were assembled into a complete skeleton, some researchers estimated that the individual could have stood between 3 and 4 meters tall. That would make the figure far taller than even the tallest humans recorded in modern history. News of the discovery quickly spread beyond the excavation site. Images began circulating online, and speculation followed almost immediately. Some experts urged caution, reminding the public that unusual bone formations can sometimes be misinterpreted. Geological processes, erosion, and even fossilized animal remains have occasionally been mistaken for human bones in the past. However, others believe the discovery deserves serious attention, because the possibility of unusually large human-like skeletons is not entirely absent from historical records. Throughout ancient texts and legends across many cultures, there are stories describing giant beings who once walked the earth. In the Bible, one of the most well-known references appears in the book of Genesis. The passage states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." Genesis 6:4. For centuries, scholars and theologians have debated the meaning of this verse. The word Nephilim has often been interpreted as referring to giants or powerful beings that existed in the distant past. Some interpretations suggest these figures were simply powerful warriors or rulers remembered through legend. Others believe the passage describes something far more mysterious. Ancient writings outside the Bible, including certain early Jewish texts, also mention enormous beings said to have lived in ancient times. In these writings, giants are sometimes described as possessing great strength and towering height. Because of these accounts, discoveries of unusually large skeletal remains often spark renewed interest in the question: could such beings have truly existed? Of course, modern science approaches these claims carefully. Many alleged discoveries of giant skeletons throughout history have later been explained as misidentified fossils or exaggerated stories. Yet the bones found near the Euphrates continue to raise questions among those studying the region. The area itself holds enormous historical significance. For thousands of years, the lands surrounding the Euphrates have been home to some of the earliest civilizations on Earth, cultures that left behind myths, writings, and artifacts describing a world that was sometimes very different from the one we know today. If the skeletal remains uncovered during the excavation truly belonged to a human-like individual of such extraordinary size, they could challenge current understanding of ancient history. But even among those who believe giants may have existed, many researchers argue that the story does not end there, because according to certain interpretations of ancient texts, the giants themselves were not the beginning of the mystery. They were only a consequence of something else, a deeper and more controversial idea that appears in several ancient writings. An idea involving beings described not as humans, but as fallen angels. And according to some religious scholars, the existence of giants may only represent one small part of a much larger story, one that reaches back to events described in the earliest pages of human history. As the discoveries near the Euphrates began to raise more questions, the sword embedded in stone, the massive footprints, and the enormous skeletal remains, some researchers and religious scholars turned their attention to a much older story, a story recorded in ancient texts, a story that has fascinated and troubled readers for centuries. It is the story of the fallen angels. According to several interpretations of early biblical writings, not all angels remained in heaven. Some were said to have left their place in the heavenly realm, crossing the boundary between the spiritual world and the world of humans. These beings are often referred to as fallen angels. One of the most debated passages appears in the book of Genesis. The text describes a mysterious moment when heavenly beings interacted with humanity. The scripture states, "The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose." Genesis 6:2. For centuries, the scholars have debated the meaning of the phrase, "sons of God." Some interpret it as referring to human rulers or noble families, but other ancient interpretations suggest the phrase may describe angelic beings. According to those interpretations, certain angels descended to earth and began interacting with human civilization. This idea appears even more clearly in ancient writings such as the Book of Enoch, an early Jewish text that expands on the mysterious events described in Genesis. In that account, a group of angels known as the Watchers are said to have descended to earth and shared knowledge with humanity. They reportedly taught people various skills, things like metallurgy, weapons, and other forms of advanced knowledge. But the texts also claim that these interactions had consequences. According to the ancient story, the unions between these heavenly beings and human women produced a race of powerful offspring. These offspring were described as giants, massive beings possessing unusual strength and size. In some ancient writings, these giants were said to have become so destructive that they disrupted the balance of the world. Their presence created chaos, violence, and fear among early human communities. Because of this, some interpretations suggest that divine judgment eventually came upon the earth. Many people link this idea to the story of the Great Flood, believing it was part of a larger effort to restore order. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the story of fallen angels and giants has remained one of the most mysterious themes in ancient religious literature. And this is where the discoveries near the Euphrates begin to spark new curiosity, because the Euphrates River itself appears in several prophetic passages of the Bible. One particularly striking verse appears in the book of Revelation. "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." Revelation 9:14. For centuries, theologians have wondered what this passage truly means. Some believe it represents symbolic spiritual forces connected to future events. Others believe it describes literal beings restrained until a specific moment in history. The idea that 4 powerful angels are bound near the Euphrates has inspired many interpretations and discussions. When modern discoveries emerge in the same region, objects buried in stone, enormous footprints, when possible giant remains, it inevitably draws attention to those ancient words. Of course, historians and scientists emphasize that extraordinary claims require careful evidence. Archaeological discoveries must be studied thoroughly before any conclusions are reached. Still, the connection between ancient texts and modern discoveries continues to fascinate people around the world. Because if even a small part of these ancient accounts reflects historical events, it would suggest that the story of humanity is far more complex than many imagine. It would mean that the early chapters of our history might include encounters with forces that ancient writers struggled to describe. And it would raise profound questions about how much of our past remains hidden beneath the layers of time, whether the stories of fallen angels are symbolic, or historical, or something in between. They continue to shape the way many people interpret mysterious discoveries. And as more secrets emerge from the lands surrounding the Euphrates, the line between legend, archaeology, and prophecy becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Because sometimes the most ancient stories are not simply myths. Sometimes they may be echoes of events the world has not fully understood yet. As we look back at the discoveries connected to the Euphrates, the mystery becomes difficult to ignore. First, there was the ancient sword embedded deep in stone, standing silently as if it had been placed there to guard or seal something long ago. Then came the giant footprints, impressions in the earth far too large to belong to any ordinary human, appearing after the rain washed away centuries of dust. Not far from there, researchers reported the discovery of massive skeletal remains, bones that seemed to belong to a figure far taller than any known human. And surrounding all of these findings is the ancient story of fallen angels, a legend written in early texts describing beings who once crossed the boundary between heaven and earth. Each of these discoveries, taken on its own, may have a reasonable explanation. Nature can shape the ground in the strange ways. Artifacts can survive longer than expected. Bones can sometimes be misidentified. But when all of these discoveries appear in the same region, near one of the most historically and spiritually significant rivers on Earth, many people begin to look at the bigger picture. The Euphrates has been mentioned in ancient writings for thousands of years. It has witnessed the rise of civilizations, the birth of legends, and the unfolding of events that shaped human history. Now, as new discoveries emerge from the lands surrounding this ancient river, curiosity continues to grow. Because sometimes the past reveals pieces of a story that humanity may not fully understand yet. And that leaves us with a question that continues to echo among historians, archaeologists, and believers alike. Are these discoveries simply ancient mysteries, or clues pointing to a forgotten chapter of human history? If this story fascinated you, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell us in the comments what you think. Are these discoveries just coincidence, or signs connected to something far greater?
The moment the water pulled back, history seemed to change. The water receded, the ground cracked open, and a strange object slowly emerged from the ancient mud of the Euphrates. The first images showed something resting in the dry riverbed. No markings, no explanation, no clear origin, just a presence that made anyone who saw it feel uneasy. And as more people began connecting it to ancient warnings, one question started echoing everywhere. Why now? Before we go deeper, stay with us until the very end, because what you're about to see may change the way you look at this river forever. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below, because some discoveries are too powerful to ignore. The drought dragged on season after season. Temperatures rose, rainfall became rare, and the Euphrates, a river once believed to be unchanging, began to transform. Water levels dropped day by day, slowly but relentlessly. The sections of the river that were once deep and powerful were reduced to thin streams moving across hardened mud. The riverbanks pulled back, revealing ground that had not been seen for generations. From above, the riverbed looked like a long, open wound, cracks stretching across the earth, splitting ancient layers of sediment into massive fragments. Locals stood and watched in silence. They had lived beside this river their entire lives, yet, for the first time, it felt unfamiliar. One resident said the river no longer felt alive. Another described it as if it were retreating, making room for something else to appear. At first, people assumed it was simply nature, drought, climate change, familiar explanations. But as the days passed, a growing sense of unease spread through the region. Not just because the water was disappearing, but because of the strange silence that followed. The sound of rushing water was gone. The constant movement that once defined the river had faded away. Only the wind moved through the cracks of the drying earth. And then, at night, something else began. Some residents living near the river reported hearing low, distant sounds rising from beneath the ground. No clear source. Nothing familiar. The sound would come and go. A deep, rhythmic vibration lingering in the darkness. At first, no one believed it. But as more people heard it, the story spread. And that was when people began to realize the frightening part wasn't that the river was disappearing. It was what seemed to be waking up as the water pulled away. When the waters of the Euphrates began to fall, people thought it was just another drought. The river had changed before. Water levels rise and fall. That was nothing new. But this time, something else came with the silence. It started at night. A deep, low vibration rising from beneath the riverbed. Not loud enough to cause panic, but impossible to ignore once it was heard. The sound didn't echo across the surface. It felt trapped below, moving through the ground itself. Those who lived near the river tried to explain it away. Some blamed shifting earth. Others suspected distant machinery. But the ones who stood closest said the same thing. It was neither. It didn't sound like an earthquake. There were no sudden tremors, no violent shaking. It didn't sound like engines either, no rhythm, no mechanical pattern. Instead, it was slow, deliberate, almost alive. People described feeling it before hearing it. A faint pressure inside the chest, a subtle vibration moving through the body as if the sound was passing straight through them. And while it happened, the river itself remained nearly motionless. The surface calm, dark, and still, as if listening. Night after night the sound returned, always low, always patient. Some came just to stand in silence and wait for it. Others refused to go near the river after sunset. Stories spread quickly, not because anyone understood what was happening, but because no one could explain it. And then the fear changed. It was no longer about the river disappearing. It was about what the river might be revealing. As the water pulled farther away, the cracks in the earth widened. The ground seemed to open, slowly exposing what had been hidden for centuries. And with every new fracture, the sound felt closer, deeper, as if something beneath the surface had been waiting for the water to leave. In moments like this, some remembered the words written long ago. The whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Romans 8:22. Maybe it was only nature shifting beneath a drying river. Or maybe the sound was something older, something that had never truly gone silent. Because sometimes, the most unsettling thing is not what we see, but what we begin to hear when everything else becomes quiet. As the waters of the Euphrates continued to pull away, the sound beneath the river did not stop. Night after night, the same low vibration echoed through the empty riverbed. Steady, patient, almost rhythmic. People who came close said the sound felt stronger now, as if the retreating water had removed something that once kept it hidden. The surface remained still, the air heavy, and the sound continued. Then the ground began to change. Cracks widened across the exposed mud, splitting open sections that had not seen sunlight for centuries. At first, dark shapes appeared between the fractures, small, curved outlines barely visible beneath the dirt. But as more sediment collapsed away, the shapes became clear. They were vessels. Strange, upright containers rising slowly from the riverbed, as if they had been waiting there all along. They did not look like ordinary pottery. Their forms were unusual, marked by wing-like extensions along the sides, giving them an almost living presence. And wrapped around each vessel was the same symbol, a serpent. Not painted, not carved later. The serpent was part of the structure itself, circling tightly around the body, climbing upward as if guarding whatever lay inside. Some vessels appeared sealed completely, their tops closed and untouched by time. They were not scattered randomly. They stood in rows, aligned with intention. Investigators searched for signs of worship or ritual, but nothing matched known traditions. There were no offerings, no inscriptions, no evidence of ceremony. Instead, the impression was unsettlingly different. These vessels did not look like objects meant to be opened. They looked contained, restrained, sealed. And as more of them emerged, the sound beneath the ground seemed to grow deeper, vibrating through the air, through the earth, through anyone standing nearby. And people began to wonder if the sound and the vessels were connected. Because the river wasn't just revealing objects. It felt as if something had been kept hidden, and the water had been the final barrier. And then, when observers stepped back far enough to see the wider landscape, they realized something even more disturbing. The vessels were not the center of the discovery. They were only the beginning. When the strange vessels first emerged from the drying bed of the Euphrates, most people believed that was the discovery everyone had been waiting for. The winged shapes, the serpents wrapped tightly around them, the feeling that they had been sealed rather than abandoned. All of it already felt unsettling enough. But the river was not finished revealing its secrets. As the water continued to withdraw, the land stretched farther into the distance than anyone remembered seeing. What had once been hidden beneath moving currents now lay exposed under harsh sunlight. Investigators and locals began walking farther beyond the rows of vessels, curious about the strange lines appearing along the horizon. At first, they looked like shadows, uneven shapes rising from the earth. But as more sediment dried and collapsed away, the outlines became clearer. Straight edges, angles, patterns too deliberate to be natural. Stone walls slowly emerged, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries underwater, yet still standing with quiet strength. The more the river pulled back, the more of them appeared. Soon, narrow corridors began to reveal themselves, running between sections of collapsed ground. Foundations spread outward beneath layers of hardened mud, forming the unmistakable shape of an ancient settlement. An entire city was rising back into view. What made the discovery unsettling was not only its size, but its condition. Unlike ruins destroyed by war or disaster, there were no signs of violent collapse, no scorched surfaces, no scattered remains suggesting panic or sudden destruction. The structures felt preserved rather than broken, as if they had simply been covered, hidden, and forgotten beneath the river for generations. Walking through the exposed pathways felt strange. The silence pressed against the air. Every footstep echoed softly against stone that had not been touched for centuries. Dust drifted through beams of light, and the wind moved slowly through empty corridors that once must have carried voices, movement, and life. Researchers tried to imagine what the city had looked like when it was alive. Long passageways connected open spaces that might once have been gathering areas. Thick stone foundations suggested buildings meant to last. Everything felt carefully planned, not chaotic, not temporary. And yet the strongest feeling was not curiosity. It was stillness. The city felt frozen, as if time had stopped in the middle of a moment and never resumed. Nothing suggested struggle or escape. It felt as though the people who once lived there had simply disappeared, leaving everything behind exactly as it was. As cameras moved deeper into the ruins, many began to wonder if the strange vessels discovered earlier were connected to this place. Their careful arrangement no longer seemed random. Instead, they felt like markers, silent signs pointing toward something larger buried beneath the river's history. The deeper the teams walked, the heavier the atmosphere seemed to become. The air felt unmoving, almost suspended. Even the sounds of equipment and footsteps seemed muted, swallowed by the stone walls around them. Then someone noticed something unusual. Farther ahead, beyond the broken edges of the city, shapes stood motionless between the ruins. At first they looked like pillars or damaged columns. But as the light shifted, their outlines sharpened. They were figures. Tall, carved forms standing in silence, watching over streets that had not seen human life for centuries. No one spoke for a moment, because the discovery changed everything. The city was not empty. It had guardians, or at least symbols placed with intention. And the way they stood, facing the same direction, created a feeling that was impossible to ignore. It was as if the entire city had been waiting for something, or someone. The wind moved through the corridors again, carrying dust across ancient stone. Cameras slowed. Footsteps stopped. And in the middle of those forgotten streets, surrounded by silence that felt older than memory itself, everyone understood one thing. The vessels were not the final discovery. The city was not the final discovery either. Because between those ancient roads, there was something that made everyone fall completely silent. As the ancient city slowly emerged from beneath the receding waters of the Euphrates, investigators expected to find ruins, broken pottery, and the scattered traces of ordinary life. What they did not expect was the silence that seemed to follow them deeper into the site, a silence that felt heavy, almost deliberate, as if the ground itself was holding something back. The discovery came in a narrow section of the ruins, hidden beneath layers of hardened sediment and collapsed stone. At first, the shapes looked like fragments of pale rock. But as the dust was cleared away, the truth became impossible to ignore. They were bones, not scattered randomly as if left behind by time or disaster, but arranged in long, straight rows. Skeleton after skeleton lay parallel to one another, positioned with unsettling precision. There were no signs of ritual, no offerings, no carvings, no symbols of honor or remembrance. Nothing that resembled a burial tradition known from the region. The arrangement felt clinical. It did not look like a place of mourning. It looked like a place of process. Investigators noticed that many of the remains were aligned in the same direction, spaced almost evenly, as if whoever placed them there followed a strict pattern. Some skeletons appeared incomplete, missing sections that should have been present. Others were positioned in ways that suggested handling rather than rest. The impression was deeply uncomfortable. These individuals had not been laid to rest with care. They had been arranged, and that distinction changed everything. Across ancient civilizations, burial rites were sacred. Even in times of war or crisis, people left signs of respect, objects, markings, gestures meant to honor the dead. But here, there was none of that. No names, no identity, no indication that these were individuals remembered by those who came after them. Instead, the rows felt impersonal, almost administrative. As cameras moved slowly across the site, the atmosphere grew heavier. The silence surrounding the remains felt unnatural, as if the air itself resisted disturbance. Some members of the team later described a strange sensation while standing among the rows, not fear exactly, but a deep discomfort, as though they were witnessing something never meant to be seen. Theories quickly emerged: a disease outbreak, a mass execution, a moment of sudden catastrophe. Yet none fully explained the precision of the arrangement. Catastrophe creates chaos. Panic leaves disorder. But this was orderly, controlled. The word that kept returning was processed. Not buried, not honored, processed. And that idea raised a darker question. What kind of system had once existed here that treated human remains this way? The discovery forced researchers to reconsider the entire city. The sealed vessels found nearby, the silent corridors, the absence of destruction. All of it began to feel connected. The city did not appear to have fallen in violence. It felt more like something had been completed, closed, and then hidden beneath the river itself. As night approached, shadows stretched across the rows of bones, making them appear endless. The wind moved softly through the ruins, carrying dust over the remains as if trying once again to cover them. Standing there, many were reminded of an ancient warning written long ago. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. Genesis 3:19. The words echo differently in a place like this. Not as a gentle reminder of mortality, but as a stark reflection of how fragile human memory truly is. These people had once lived, spoken, hoped, and now they lay in silence, stripped of ritual, identity, and story. The longer investigators studied the site, the clearer one thing became. This was not a cemetery in the traditional sense. It was something else, something designed with purpose, but a purpose that had been erased along with time itself. And perhaps that was what made the discovery so unsettling. Because the rows of skeletons did not feel like the end of a story. They felt like evidence of something larger, a system, a decision, a moment in history that someone had tried very hard to bury. And as the Euphrates continued to retreat, exposing more of the city day by day, one question lingered in the minds of everyone who walked those silent corridors. What happened here? That required silence to last this long. As investigators moved deeper into the exposed ruins, the silence of the ancient city felt heavier than before. Between broken walls and half-buried pathways, shapes began to rise from the dust. Tall, weathered figures carved from stone, standing motionless as if untouched by time. The statues were massive, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries beneath water and sediment. Some were damaged, their features softened by erosion, yet their posture remained unmistakable. They stood upright, rigid, deliberate. And then came the detail no one could ignore. Every statue faced the same direction. Not one looked away, not one turned back toward the city. Their gaze stretched outward beyond the ruins, fixed on something unseen in the distance. It was too precise to be coincidence, too intentional to dismiss as random placement. The psychological effect was immediate. Walking among them felt unsettling, as if entering a space where attention had already been claimed. Researchers described the sensation of being observed, not by the statues themselves, but by the direction they pointed toward. The longer they stood there, the clearer the feeling became. These figures were not looking at the people who had uncovered them. They were waiting, and the thought settled heavily over the site. They are not watching us. They are waiting for something behind us. Cameras turned, following the line of sight shared by every statue. The ruins fell silent again, wind moving softly through the corridors. Whatever these figures were meant to face had survived centuries hidden beneath the river. And when survey teams finally calculated the exact direction of their gaze, the atmosphere changed instantly. Because the statues were not looking toward empty land. They were looking directly at the area where the sealed vessels had been discovered. The realization spread quickly through the site. The statues, the city, the strange vessels wrapped with serpents, all of them aligned along the same axis, as if designed to guide attention toward a single point. When mapping data was compared, the pattern became undeniable. The direction the statues faced matched perfectly with the zone where the sealed vessels stood buried beneath the riverbed. And that was not the only connection. The low vibration that had echoed from beneath the Euphrates since the water began to retreat, the deep, rhythmic sound that no one could explain, was strongest in this exact area. Instruments confirmed it. The closer researchers moved toward the aligned point, the stronger the resonance became. Yet, even more unsettling was what remained untouched. Several sections of land surrounding the vessels had never been excavated. The ground there remained sealed, cracked but unopened, as if something beneath it still resisted exposure. Teams hesitated, unsure whether to proceed or wait for further analysis. Standing at the center of the alignment, everything began to feel deliberate. The sound beneath the ground, the vessels wrapped in serpents, the statues staring in silence, the city frozen in time. Nothing felt accidental anymore. It felt arranged, as if each element had been placed to form a message, or perhaps a warning, waiting for the river to disappear before it could be seen again. And with that realization, the question slowly changed. No longer about what had been discovered, but something far more unsettling. Was something being released, or was something beginning to wake? No final answer has been given. No official conclusion explains everything that has appeared along the Euphrates. Only fragments remain, the water pulling away, the low sound rising from beneath the earth, the sealed vessels wrapped in symbols of restraint, the ancient city frozen in silence, and the statues standing still, as if waiting for a moment that has not yet arrived. Piece by piece, the river has revealed what time tried to hide. And yet, the more that is uncovered, the less certain everything feels. Nothing stands alone. The sound connects to the ground. The vessels connect to the city. The statues point toward something no one fully understands. For thousands of years, the river kept its secrets buried beneath water and mud. But as it retreats, those secrets are beginning to speak for themselves. And now the question remains, not what was found, but what it means. If you feel this is more than coincidence, stay with us. Subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us what you think is really happening here, because this story is far from over.
One such feature was a cave entrance that emerged unexpectedly, sparking immediate interest from local researchers and global watchers alike.
For centuries, the Euphrates River flowed without interruption. Quiet, constant, almost taken for granted. But now, as the water rises and falls abruptly, violent whirlpools form beneath the surface, and low-frequency sounds are recorded echoing through nearby caves at night. The ancient warnings feel uncomfortably close to the present. And what people are finding is not just ancient, it's unsettling enough to make the whole world stop and ask a dangerous question. Was this meant to be seen now? If this resonates with you, don't remain silent. Share your readiness in the comments section and like this video before we continue. Near the Euphrates River, the water itself begins to behave in ways no one can easily explain. It no longer moves as a steady current flowing downstream. In multiple locations, the surface suddenly collapses into powerful whirlpools, spinning without warning, pulling debris inward as if the river is opening beneath itself. In some stretches, the water forms violent suction currents, like sinkholes made of liquid. Witnesses describe moments when the river does not flow forward at all. Instead, it appears to sink straight down, vanishing into unseen channels beneath the riverbed. Boats drift, then tilt. Fishermen retreat. Families along the banks step back as the water seems to empty from below. Within hours, the waterline drops dramatically. What was submerged for generations is exposed all at once. Cracked earth split open by drought, ancient stones worn smooth by time, and structures that were never meant to see daylight. This is not a slow, seasonal change. It happens abruptly, precisely, unsettlingly. The sound of the river changes too. What was once a familiar, steady rush becomes low and hollow, an echoing pull, as if something beneath the surface is drawing the river away. What makes this even more disturbing is the land itself. These are dry, hardened regions shaped by years of drought. Ground that should resist sudden movement gives way instantly, as if its strength has been exhausted. The river does not simply recede, it behaves as if it is being drained in stages. Thousands of miles away, different landscapes tell a similar story. In the United States, water also arrives without patience or warning. Structures designed to endure roads, neighborhoods, entire districts are overwhelmed in minutes. Not slowly, not gradually, but faster than human reaction. And that is what should make everyone pause. Different continents, different climates, different systems. Yet the pattern is the same. Water no longer behaves as something predictable. It does not wait. It does not negotiate. It does not give time to prepare. Scripture speaks of a time when the world appeared stable until it suddenly was not. Jesus warned that in the days of Noah, life went on as usual. People planned, built, and assumed tomorrow would come the same as today. Until the waters arrived. They were not destroyed because they did not see change. They were destroyed because they delayed responding to it. Today, the signs do not come as one global flood. They come in fragments, sudden, targeted, overwhelming. While the world insists everything is still normal, and when change happens in hours, not years, not generations, the most urgent question remains: who will be ready when there is no time left to react? As the river's water begins to retreat in disturbing ways, another phenomenon quietly emerges after dark. And when the water finally pulls back, it doesn't just expose the land, it exposes what was deliberately hidden beneath it. Near the Euphrates River, as layers of mud and sediment are stripped away, a sealed underground chamber emerges from the riverbed. Not a ruin, not a tomb, but a structure built with purpose. At its center stand 4 massive chains, positioned with exact alignment along the cardinal directions north, south, east, and west. The placement is not decorative, not symbolic. The chamber itself appears to have been constructed around these restraints, not added later. Every wall, every angle, every anchor point suggests that holding something in place was the reason this space existed at all. The chains immediately defy expectation. There are no welds, no hammer marks, no signs of ancient forging. Each link is seamless, formed as a single continuous piece of metal far beyond what any known ancient technology could produce. Metallurgical analysis indicates temperatures nearing 3,000 degrees Celsius would be required to create material like this. Even more unsettling, the metal shows no corrosion, no decay. Despite centuries underground, the surface remains intact and warm, as if residual heat still lingers within. This leads to a conclusion that cannot be ignored. These restraints were not ceremonial. They were functional, they were used, and not in some distant, forgotten age. The stone surrounding each chain is fractured outward, not inward. The rock did not collapse from age or erosion. It split, as if immense force had been applied from within the chamber itself, force strong enough to strain against solid bedrock. There are no remains, no collapse, only empty restraints and damage consistent with release. What makes this discovery deeply unsettling is not simply what was found, but what is missing. For centuries, the Euphrates flowed above this chamber, silent and undisturbed. Empires rose and fell, wars passed, civilizations changed. And yet, whatever this structure was built to contain remained unseen, until now. The timing cannot be separated from the moment. This chamber did not appear during a controlled excavation. It was revealed only after violent changes in the river stripped away what had concealed it for generations. The same water that reshaped the land also uncovered what was never meant to be encountered. Scripture carries a warning that echoes with disturbing clarity. There are things restrained for a reason, bound until an appointed time, not forgotten but held back. And when restraint ends, consequences follow. This chamber stands as a silent testimony. Preparation does not always mean protection. Some structures are not meant to preserve life, but to delay judgment. And that leaves a question heavier than any artifact left behind. If what was bound has been released, was the world ever meant to be ready for what comes next? As the water recedes, it does more than scar the land. Across the Middle East, one ancient river is changing in ways few expected. As the waters of the Euphrates continue to fall, long-hidden ruins, forgotten artifacts, and unexplained discoveries are beginning to surface, raising questions that stretch far beyond archaeology. Are these simply the results of climate and time, or could they be revealing pieces of a much larger story that history has kept buried? In today's video, we'll explore what is being uncovered, why it matters, and the deeper meanings many believe are connected to these events. If you enjoy content that explores history, mystery, and discovery, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The Euphrates River is not just another geographic landmark. For thousands of years, it has stood at the center of human civilization, shaping the rise and fall of empires that once defined the ancient world. Flowing through modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, the river watered the lands where some of the earliest cities ever built began to flourish. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all depended on its waters, transforming the surrounding plains into the fertile heart of early civilization. Because of this, historians often describe the Euphrates region as the cradle of civilization, a place where writing, law systems, and organized urban life first appeared. Beyond history, the river also holds deep religious significance. In Genesis 2:14, the Euphrates is named as one of the 4 rivers flowing from the Garden of Eden, placing it directly within the earliest biblical narrative of humanity. Later, it became a symbolic boundary in the history of Israel, and was repeatedly mentioned in prophetic passages describing future global events. This dual identity, both historical and prophetic, is one reason why any change affecting the Euphrates quickly captures worldwide attention. Throughout centuries, conquerors crossed the Euphrates to expand their territories. Trade caravans followed its banks, and entire populations built their lives around its seasonal rhythms. The river was not merely water flowing through land. It was an artery of survival, power, and cultural exchange. Even today, millions depend on it for agriculture, drinking water, and electricity generation through dam systems constructed along its course. When a river with such deep historical, economic, and spiritual importance begins to change dramatically, people do not see it as an ordinary environmental event. Instead, they sense that something larger may be unfolding, something tied not only to geography, but also to the long memory of human civilization itself. For generations, the people living along the Euphrates River believed its waters would remain a constant presence, flowing steadily through dry seasons and rainy ones, nourishing the land and sustaining the rhythm of daily life for millions. Yet over the past few decades, a slow but unmistakable transformation has begun to unfold. Areas that were once deep channels of moving water have gradually turned into narrow streams, winding through cracked fields of exposed mud. Boats that once traveled freely now sit stranded on newly revealed ground, silent reminders of a river that is steadily losing its strength. Satellite images collected over the years reveal a consistent decline in water levels, not a temporary fluctuation, but a long-term trend. Scientists point to multiple forces acting together: rising regional temperatures that accelerate evaporation, declining and unpredictable rainfall patterns, and extensive dam systems upstream that hold back significant portions of the river's natural flow for hydroelectric power and irrigation. Each factor alone might not dramatically transform the river, but together they are reshaping its entire ecosystem in ways that are becoming impossible to overlook. The consequences are visible far beyond scientific charts. Farmers watch their soil grow harder and less productive each season. Fishing communities that once depended on the river's abundance now struggle as fish populations shrink. Wetlands that once supported migrating birds and aquatic life gradually fade into quiet stretches of dry land. These changes do not happen overnight, yet their slow progression often makes them even more unsettling, as many people only realize the scale of transformation when the difference becomes too obvious to deny.
Although there are some other adding or additive factors,
across the lands where the Euphrates has flowed since the earliest pages of history, a quiet but undeniable change is unfolding. Waters that once concealed the depths are slowly retreating, and the ground hidden for generations is beginning to appear. Scripture reminds us that there are moments when what has long been concealed is brought into the light, not to create fear, but to awaken reflection. As ancient stones and forgotten structures rise again into view, many are asking whether these events are only natural changes or gentle reminders that time moves according to a greater purpose. If this message speaks to you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Along long stretches of the Euphrates River, the change is no longer subtle. Water levels have steadily fallen year after year, leaving behind expanding banks of dry, cracked ground where currents once flowed without interruption. In some regions, the shoreline has moved so far inward that old docks now stand over empty land instead of water, and boats that once crossed the river daily can no longer travel the same routes. Farmers living near the river report irrigation channels weakening as the flow becomes thinner each season, while exposed riverbeds continue to widen under the sun. Satellite monitoring and regional water reports confirm what local communities have already been witnessing. The Euphrates is gradually losing volume due to prolonged drought conditions, upstream water control systems, and increasing regional heat. The process is not sudden, but continuous, a slow retreat that reshapes the river little by little, month after month. In Revelation 16:12, Scripture states, "The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up." For centuries, this passage has been read both literally and symbolically. Some interpret it as a prophetic reference to a future moment when the river itself would change, while others understand it as a broader image of long-standing boundaries beginning to shift. Today, as the Euphrates continues to recede across multiple regions, the visible decline of one of the world's oldest rivers is drawing renewed attention not only for its environmental impact, but also for the historical and spiritual significance long associated with its waters. As the Euphrates continues to recede, the most striking change is no longer the falling waterline, but what the retreat is quietly leaving behind. Sections of the river that once carried deep, fast-moving currents are now opening into wide plains of exposed earth, stretching far beyond what local residents remember seeing in their lifetimes. From a distance, the newly uncovered ground appears almost motionless, but up close, it tells a different story. Layers of hardened mud cracked by the sun, scattered stones forming unnatural lines, and shallow channels marking where water once moved with relentless force. Old river docks that once stood at the edge of the current now overlook dry land. Wooden posts that used to disappear beneath the surface during high-flow seasons rise several feet above the remaining water, silent measurements of how much the river has withdrawn. In some places, abandoned boats sit tilted on the ground, their hulls coated with dust rather than river sediment, as though time itself paused the moment the water left them behind. The change is happening slowly enough that it rarely creates a single dramatic headline, yet steadily enough that those who live near the river feel the difference every year. Fishing routes that families followed for generations are no longer navigable. Channels that once connected villages across the river have narrowed into thin streams that can sometimes be crossed on foot. Farmers who relied on predictable seasonal flows now watch irrigation canals weaken earlier than expected, adjusting planting cycles as the dependable rhythm of the river becomes less certain. Satellite images confirm the gradual transformation. Over the past decades, the Euphrates has been shrinking in width across multiple regions, its once broad expanse tightening into narrower pathways shaped by drought, upstream water management, and increasing regional heat. None of these changes appear sudden when observed in isolation, but when compared across years, the difference becomes unmistakable. The river is not disappearing overnight, it is retreating step by step, revealing land that has not been visible for generations. What makes the moment feel different is not only the environmental shift, but the sense that each newly exposed stretch of ground seems to carry the quiet weight of something unfinished. The riverbed does not emerge as empty space. It appears layered, marked, and occasionally structured in ways that suggest long histories hidden beneath the surface. And with every passing season, the waterline moves slightly farther back, uncovering terrain that few expected to see within a single lifetime. If this unfolding transformation captures your attention, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for the next chapter of this investigation, and share in the comments what you believe these changes may ultimately reveal. At first, the exposed riverbed appeared to be nothing more than open stretches of hardened earth. The surface seemed uneven, shaped only by years of shifting water and sun-dried mud. But as the waterline continued to move farther away week after week, small irregularities in the ground began drawing closer attention. What initially looked like scattered stones gradually revealed patterns, straight alignments that did not quite match the randomness of natural erosion. In several newly exposed sections, clusters of rock appeared partially embedded in the soil, their edges sharper than surrounding formations. Over time, as more sediment dried and loosened, faint outlines of low walls began to take shape. They did not rise dramatically from the ground, nor did they immediately resemble recognizable ruins. Instead, they appeared quietly, almost reluctantly, as if emerging layer by layer from beneath the surface. Observers who revisited the same locations months apart noticed the difference. Lines that were once barely visible had become clearer, corners more defined, and sections of stone foundations slowly extending farther than expected. Local residents described how certain areas that once seemed empty gradually began to show repeating shapes, stones placed in sequences that suggested human arrangement rather than natural scattering. Archaeological teams working in nearby regions approached these areas carefully, documenting the formations as they became more exposed. Their findings suggested that some of these structures may belong to older settlements long buried beneath layers of river sediment, preserved for generations beneath the constant movement of water. What makes the process remarkable is not the sudden discovery of a single monument, but the quiet unfolding of multiple fragments over time. A section of wall appears one season. Months later, a connected foundation becomes visible nearby. Eventually, what once seemed like isolated stones begins to form the outline of something larger, a structure that had remained hidden simply because the river had covered it for centuries. The land does not reveal everything at once. Instead, it releases its history gradually, allowing each newly exposed detail to raise further questions about what still remains below the remaining layers of earth. As the Euphrates continues to retreat, the slow emergence of these structures suggests that the visible fragments may only represent the earliest layer of what lies beneath. With each passing season, more ground is uncovered, and with it comes the possibility that entire segments of long-forgotten settlements are still waiting to surface. As the Euphrates continues to retreat, the scattered remains of stone foundations and partial walls begin to connect in ways that were not immediately obvious at first. What once appeared as isolated fragments slowly reveals a broader pattern, suggesting the outline of something far larger than a few abandoned structures. Over time, the exposed terrain begins to form the recognizable shape of an ancient settlement, one that had remained concealed beneath layers of river sediment for centuries. From above, the arrangement of the ruins becomes even more striking. Straight corridors of stone appear to trace the paths of former streets, while clusters of rectangular foundations suggest rows of buildings that once stood side by side. Some sections show evidence of thicker outer walls, hinting that the settlement may have once been fortified, possibly serving as a protected city along one of the most important waterways of the ancient world. The positioning of these walls indicates that the city was deliberately planned rather than randomly built, reflecting the architectural discipline of a civilization that understood both defense and urban organization. In several areas, portions of what appear to be large storage chambers or communal structures begin to emerge, their bases preserved by the constant covering of water that shielded them from centuries of erosion. The preserved symmetry of these spaces suggests that the city once played a significant role in regional trade or administration, functioning not merely as a small village, but as a center of activity connected to surrounding territories. The river that now withdraws from its banks may once have flowed directly alongside these structures, supplying transportation, irrigation, and strategic advantage to those who lived there. What deepens the sense of mystery is the unusual state of preservation. While many ancient ruins collapse into scattered debris over time, several segments of this emerging city remain surprisingly intact at their foundations, as though the river had quietly protected them until the present moment. The surrounding silence of the exposed riverbed adds to the atmosphere, creating the impression that the city has not been destroyed in a dramatic event, but rather gradually hidden and forgotten as the river's course shifted across generations. Local observers who revisit the site over successive months report that more sections continue to appear as the waterline moves farther away. Stones that were barely visible weeks earlier now stand fully exposed, and outlines that once seemed uncertain now clearly define the boundaries of streets, courtyards, and structural compounds. The slow pace of the unveiling creates a sense that the land is revealing its history deliberately, not all at once, but in stages, each newly exposed segment raising new questions about the people who once lived there, the events that led to the city's disappearance, and how many more layers still remain concealed beneath the remaining sediment. If this gradual emergence continues, the visible ruins may represent only the outer edge of a much larger ancient city still waiting beneath the surface. Its deeper sections perhaps preserved even more completely than what is already visible today. As more of the ancient ground is uncovered, attention slowly shifts from what can be clearly seen to what cannot yet be fully explained. Along several newly exposed stretches of the Euphrates, observers have begun to notice openings in the terrain, dark recesses in the earth, that do not resemble ordinary erosion. At first glance, they appear to be nothing more than small cavities formed by collapsing sediment, yet some of these openings reveal shapes that seem unusually defined, edges that suggest depth rather than shallow hollows. During the day, these formations remain silent, blending almost naturally into the landscape, but as evening settles over the riverbanks and the surrounding environment grows quieter, stories begin to circulate among nearby communities. Some residents describe hearing low, distant vibrations late at night, sounds that seem to carry through the ground rather than through the air. Others mention brief echoes resembling metallic reverberations, faint enough to leave uncertainty, yet clear enough to be remembered. None of these reports provide definitive explanations, and many of them may eventually be traced to natural underground movement or shifting geological layers. Still, the combination of newly exposed terrain and unfamiliar sounds has created an atmosphere that feels different from what the region has experienced before. Rather than presenting a single dramatic discovery, the landscape appears to be revealing possibilities step by step. A newly exposed section of land draws curiosity. An unusual opening in the soil invites closer inspection. A faint sound heard at night raises another question. Each detail alone may seem insignificant, yet together they form a quiet sense that the surface of the riverbed is only the beginning of a much deeper story. What lies beneath these openings remains largely unknown, not because it is intentionally hidden, but because much of the ground has only recently become accessible for the first time in generations.